Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. The Microphones. The Glow Part 2. The Microphones was an American folk indie rock project fronted by one singer, songwriter, and producer, Phil Elverum, a man who, if you've inhabited any corner of the critic sphere, should need no introduction. Delivering a catalog chock full of potent yet truly honest material, and I've heard next to none of it despite my years of listening to music. The Microphones for me are one of the regrettably many artists that I haven't listened to much that receive such adoration and praise, essentially etching themselves into the critical zeitgeist of music, along with other acts like Bjork or Aphex Twin or Swans, a genre I've coined as criticcore. Thankfully, this journey of mine here on YouTube has opened me up to a lot of this type of music that I never would have otherwise, Radiohead and Talk Talk and Mid-Air Thief to name a few, and I guess now it's the Microphone's turn with this suggestion to check out the seminal third release by the project, The Glow Part 2, released in 2001. I've rambled enough here, so let's just dive in. What are my thoughts on The Glow Part 2? Let's find out as I review it, track by track. Since I'm pretty sure there were no prior singles, we will just start at the top of the track list with that being I Want Wind to Blow, which seems to be the main song everyone knows, and it begins with this heartsick acoustic guitar plucking, truly setting the stage for the rest of the record. It's rough, it's organic, yet dances with a sticky melody that doesn't seem to leave once it's indoctrinated. The developing instrumental comes and goes, containing some hollow clunking of percussion and simple tambourine. It sure is a warm-sounding track for lyrics this defeatist, which shows Phil feeling adrift in his life after this breakup, feeling lost in his newfound freedom, suffocated by his surroundings, but yet nothing has changed. It's all just a repetitious cycle which only heightens a sense of purposelessness, so he's hoping some drastic change will break him from that. The actual lyrics of the track cut out before the halfway point, as the last 3 minutes is just building instrumental and build to the point of cataclysm, eventually reaching this fierce eruptive percussion and everything just getting louder. Could not ask for a better way to end this track. Excellent stuff. The title track, The Glow Part 2, the second part of the 11-minute track from It Was Hot We Stayed in the Water, which I did check out that song in preparation for this review, and man, what a fantastic transition from I Want Wind to Blow. Starting the track on the same obscene noisiness that ended the opening track, only for that to enter a gradual fade out just to re-emerge in similarly quaint acoustic fashion. But when that second verse starts, it becomes much more of a despondent, humming, ambient piece, and this is probably one of my favorite parts of the entire album. The pessimistic acceptance of death and suffering that has Phil singing in a solemn weep to wailing out "My blood flows harshly," which is so striking. It really makes me visualize all these little details about where Phil was in his life at this point. Much like the opener, this track also ends on a prolonged instrumental, but much less coarse, just a standard folk rock instrumental, good drum pounds, gentle acoustics, all in all makes for a personal standout for me. The Moon brings back the folky acoustic plucking at the start, which has such an openly melancholic tint to it. I adore that sound every time. What I don't adore as much is the actual instrumental that comes in about 1 minute and 15 seconds. Now, I want to state right now, this is 100% a personal thing, but when I'm listening to music, I typically like to be able to actually hear lyrics, and in some cases, they are audible enough, but on the verses where Phil is singing in a more lackadaisical tone, it is pretty difficult, which is unfortunate, because one, the instrumental is amazing by itself. I love the jazziness of these horns and the abrasiveness on display, very fun. And two, these lyrics are absolutely fantastic, mainly about reminiscing about this lost love, all the moments he treasured, and the non-existent closure he ultimately gets. Perhaps the smothering instrumental could be symbolic of the overwhelming emotions he feels over this reminiscing, which definitely does make sense and could be mixed into the story, but in terms of a musical standpoint, it just doesn't work too much for me. Headless Horseman yet again brings in the acoustics, this one instead being a ukulele, or if it isn't, it sure sounds like one. And despite it being in a sadder tone, that instrument can't help but emit this cutesy charm to me, as Phil sings in a bit of a frail, meek voice. Despite the track seeming a bit on the cuter side musically, the lyrics sure as hell don't match that, mostly about remembering what he lost and realizing what he once had is now tattered, worn, and locked to the past. Good track. My Roots Are Strong and Deep is a pretty serene, soothing cut, the piano being the dominant instrumental, and it almost absorbs all of the space in the mix to create this hypnotic dome beside the crashing percussion. I love Phil's calmer voice over this instrumental. They intertwine so smoothly with the piano, as the lyrics are basically Phil imagining himself as a tree with deep roots from past experience, trying to connect with this other being. I assume it's some spiritual figure like a god. All the while, Phil tries to grapple with his insignificance in this world, which we'll see later of on the track list. All in all, another good song. Instrumental is just that, a brief minute-and-a-half instrumental serving as a nice break from the depressing onslaught of lyrics by giving a mellow, semi-depressing instrumental. Sure doesn't start that way though. It's got some plucky, sweet, yet isolated acoustics that evolve even more with some deep, menacing drums, gorgeous fluttery pianos, and foundational snaps tying a minor groove to the last few seconds of the song. It works well for where it is in the tracklist. The Mansion, which opens up on an uneasy note, this careless hurriedness and the strumming fading between it and a more traditional melody, it really leaves me on edge as Phil's vocals are the most somber on the entire record, as he hardly even sings. It's more like reciting poetry, which tackles feeling pointless and the same kind of existentialism that was on My Roots Are Strong and Deep. It's probably the song that hit me the hardest on the record, mostly due to just how lifeless the tone of the track is. It truly feels like this is coming from the darkest crevices of Phil's psyche, to the point of conceptualizing the afterlife as this pleasant, boundless mansion that he feels locked away from being confined to the living world. It's a difficult track to really talk about, but it sure as hell hits. Something 1, which is pretty much pure ambient, but man is it chilling. It's got these extremely deep, heavy strings to pierce through the cavernous atmosphere, and occasional pops of static. Not something I was expecting to hear from this album, but it's such an enthralling listen despite how minimal it is. Something 2, which flawlessly transitions from the first one by the way, is pretty much a continuation of that sound. This time adding in some crackly, warbled static pretty quickly that gradually gets louder. It almost makes me think there's something odd going on with my headphones while I'm listening. Very anxiety inducing, especially towards the end where all that clamoring is gone and just leaves the track on almost inaudible, windy ambience. This is probably the first true instance aside from the opener that incorporates noise music, which there will also be more of further down on the track list, but this was such an unexpected detour in the record, but it still does make sense for it to be here. I'll Not Contain You, which starts off with some of the most asynchronous guitar work I've heard in a while. It almost sounds flat out broken, and while I would normally be against that, there's something in the way that plays off Phil's more drawling, drony, sustained vocals that feels erratic in a way that is very captivating, while also having rupturous drums and haunting vocal harmonies with vulnerable and painful lyrics. While it may not stand out compared to the rest of the tracks, it is still a good song. The Gleam Part 2, another sequel from another track from It's Hot We Stayed in the Water, which I also did check out. And this one feels way less metallic and industrial than the original. Part 2 feels way more hearty, lush, and almost intimidating with the moodiness of the guitar and percussion. I absolutely adore Phil's vocals on this one, may just be one of my favorite vocal performances on the record. Something about the slightly brighter timbre of them just accentuates how intense the instrumental is. I think it works really well and makes for a great tune. Map is another sonic deviation, starting off with these garbled, distorted bagpipes and a tense building percussion that serves like a bit of a rocky undercurrent when these vocals come in. And man, they feel anxious. They sound uneasy and uncomfortable. And I think the overall noisiness of the instrumental contributes to that. Around the halfway point, said instrumental begins to assemble itself and become more stable, with some trotting percussion, lighthearted chimes. However, that doesn't last long as that begins to fade away to succumb to the same noise that opened the song, ultimately closing the track on a fresher instrumental with a plunky melody and drums. It is a journey of a song, and in a way, kind of feels like a representation of Phil's emotional journey, having lows representing the distortion, having highs representing the cleaner moments. I don't know, maybe I'm looking into that too much, but all I know, it's a great song. You'll Be in the Air opens up in a pretty sweet, tame manner with some simple acoustic plucking and Phil singing with a softer falsetto, which over time begins to build up more and more until this climax with theatric, grand drums and Phil's voice practically becoming more of a shout than actual harmonious singing. Certainly an evocative moment on the record as it slides right back down to the same plucking as the start. I also adore the 5-piece thumps that happen that sync up with Phil's voice. Just an appealing attribute to me is that I see these lyrics a bit more on the literal end about this partner actually flying away from him, with very descriptive imagery on display here. Great track. I Want to Be Cold sure does not start out cold. It's quite frantic out of the gate, crashing and banging percussion, obscene walls of gritty, crackly noise, yet not nearly as smothering as The Moon was. It's more violent and aggressive than that, as the lyrics here do come off a bit melodramatic. desiring death or emotional numbness more than having to suffer the heartbreak, but the sound of this track is still very gripping, especially when it all just dies down for this outro verse to a more miserable tone, emphasizing that cold, desensitized state of mind. Another great track. I Am Bored, which is another song that opens up in a rougher way. Dense percussion pounds lace the start of the track and really make me think it's going to build to some instant climax, but it doesn't. Instead, the actual song comes off very clean and gentle, almost reminds me of like a musical number, especially in the skipping arpeggios of the piano and Phil's softer vocals. After the soul verse finishes, the raucous drums and grungy noise reintroduce themselves only to suddenly end the track on an ambient note. I feel like this is one of the more underrated cuts on the album, as he sings these lyrics about feeling bored after this breakup, all the while remembering what was likely their last fight. Quite nice. I Felt My Sighs starts out in the same similar folky acoustic strumming method. Nice to hear that again after a couple tracks change the formula a bit. However, that familiarity doesn't last too long as we get some blasting drums and wiggly, pitchy yelps. Not sure if that's synth or just tampering with such a guitar. But I think my favorite part of this track is when that part fades away and the piano and Phil's singing comes back in, but you can still make out that instrumental as the rest of the song continues. I think it's such a cool and unique moment, and I wish more artists played with that. Lyrically, this one dives fully into the existentialism displayed on tracks like My Roots Are Strong and Deep, as he mentions feeling his size in the grand scale of the sky, the earth, the universe. Very nice track. Instrumental is another instrumental cut, unsurprisingly. Exact same title as the first one, however, I like this one a lot more. Kicking off with this depressing, clicky melody, paving the way for this prominent guitar, gutting piano work, and an uneasy ambience hovering over it all. A very melancholic track that ends with Phil lightly humming. It's another great instrumental song. I Felt Your Shape returns to the same gentle, plucky acoustics, but this time there's no deviation like the previous tracks. It continues down that road for the not even 2-minute long runtime, and in a weird way, it kind of feels like a lackluster song at this point in the track list. Like every song before this one had some unique musical element, whether that be the thunderous drums or noisy accoutrements, to really help feel like the record is progressing and evolving in this second half. And then this track comes in and kind of kills that. It's the first truly folk-driven song since I'll Not Contain You, and while not being bad, it just feels a bit standard. If there's one positive I do take away from this track is that the lyrics are quite touching, literally about hugging someone and feeling their size, all the minute details and various states of a hug. Again, this track is not bad, but at least to me, this leaves very little impression in the full record. Samurai Sword is pretty much incoherent, fiery, unabashed noise, and I really like it. Every single instrument in this mix is pushed so far forward into your face that it's practically suffocating. The drums, the guitar, the bass, everything. It is such a sucker punch coming from the comparatively calm tone of the record so far. The only part that isn't loud is the vocals, which I get considering I'm not sure how anyone's voice could stand out in such a cacophony. However, the track doesn't stay like that for the entirety of its 4-minute runtime. It cuts a little over halfway through to near silence and leaves the track at that. You can still make out occasional echoes of the instrumental, though they are few and far between. Bit of an odd way to end a track like that, but the core song is still great. And finally, the closer, My Warm Blood, a near 9.5-minute finisher, and this is such a sad way to end a record. Not sad like disappointing, but like actually depressing. The core track, lyrics, vocals, instrumentation consisting of a singular soft acoustic guitar lasts for maybe 2 minutes, as Phil sings a solitary verse about how he's alone, the sun is setting, the insects buzzing around him, as the remaining 7 minutes consist of the most harrowing silence I've ever heard in my life. I'm not sure if in the story he actually dies, or this is a kind of reflection and remedial process. I think it could be seen as either, depending on how you interpret the rest of the album, but man, what a way to finish a record. Overall, The Glow Part 2 undeniably deserves this place as a classic record. It is a diverse, emotional journey full of brazen, intense punches, and along with assuaging moments as well, backed up by some truly potent poetry to accent it all. However, to me personally, it's not perfect. I feel like this record carries with it an intangible essence. If you can't relate along with Phil to some of these lyrics, it's just not going to completely click with you. And maybe that just speaks to me, as this recording, being in a happy relationship and don't really have anyone to woefully reminisce over. Hell, I'll be honest, I did not shed a single tear listening to this album multiple times over. In fact, I often found myself more entranced by the soundscapes painted on this record, more so than the lyrical content. Though I bet if I heard this when I was a glum 16-year-old, I'd be replaying this through many a desolate, brisk winter. As it stands though, this record is fantastic. Despite my few qualms with a couple tracks here, I can't deny its greatness. It has so clearly affected the lives of so many people, and I absolutely get why. I'm feeling a 9 out of 10 on this album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.